Hello and welcome to Cloud Conversations with Rue and Pete. My name's Peter Rising. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a principal consultant with a UK partner called Softcat PLC.
Hi, my name's Rue Campbell. I work alongside Pete at Softcat as a technical consultant focusing on Microsoft 365. And I guess we've put this show together really to talk to folk within our IT community, talk to people interested in 365, Azure, cloud computing in general, but then also get into the things that are maybe stray a little bit away from the technical side of things. So talk about career progression, mental health, these kind of things that will help folks get through an IT career.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've been talking about doing this for quite a while, haven't we, Rue? And what I think the format of each show will be, and we'll learn as we go. We're sort of novices at this, but we envisage that we'll spend maybe the first 10 minutes of each show just having a general chat about things, catching up. How's your week been? How's my week been? What have you noticed in the world of M365 and Azure this week? What's been interesting? Where have Microsoft been strong? Where have they messed up? And then after that, we'll lean into our regular guest. We're going to have one guest per show, and hopefully we'll have some good ones lined up for you very soon. But in terms of what's been happening recently, though, let's kick this off. One thing that I noticed in the last week, and you've probably had to have your head under a rock somewhere not to notice it, was the Azure AD outage that happened this week, Rue. There was quite a big impact for a few hours on that, wasn't there?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think you and I, and maybe the customers that we work with day to day, we were potentially shielded from it a little bit because it happened out of standard typical working hours for the UK time. But certainly, folks over in the States, they were affected by it big time because it's almost intrinsic with an authentication that it's going to be a single point of failure in a lot of cases. And the interesting thing is the timing of it almost couldn't be better because I think it's the 1st of April where for Azure AD Premium, if you're a customer of that license, the SLA is going to move from 3 nines availability for authentication to 4 nines availability. So maybe they were just getting all that downtime out of the way before they need to start paying for it. I don't know. But yeah, interesting timing.
Yeah, maybe exactly that. I noticed that 4 nines mentioned somewhere as well. So as you say, maybe they're just having one final little wobble before they bring that in. But you're right, actually. Yeah, I know it was about sort of 7 in the evening UK time, GMT, when I think I first became aware of it, and it was all over Twitter. And what I noticed in trying to get access to the various tenants that we inevitably as M365 people have access to is the only real effect I could see was that when trying to log into Teams, I couldn't see any of the files in there. They just randomly disappeared in some of the teams, and reappeared later when it was all good. And in one of our teams, we've got a Power App linked in there as well, and that was challenging for login, but wouldn't log in. So I think different people reported different things and different effects. One thing that I did notice as well, and Tony Redmond pointed this out as well on one of his tweets, was that OneDrive synced files all seem to have a very nasty effect in that synced content disappeared from the folders and ended up in the recycle bin. That happened for me as well, and I sort of chickened out a bit. I chose not to restore from the recycle bin and see what happened. I thought, well, I'll leave it. I'll work around it. And I've been meaning for a while to take the opportunity to maybe work a bit more from Teams rather than doing it the old way of synchronizing and seeing how that works. And so far, it's working out quite well for me. So, but one thing I would say about this is that Microsoft, I don't think, I mean, some people would maybe argue with me here that they have too many of these outages. Some people might think that's a controversial statement, but they always seem to sort them out pretty quickly as well. I didn't think it was down too long. I thought it was a couple of hours. They responded well. They communicate well. They tell people with updates what they're doing to remediate it and get things back. And it's never nice, but these things are going to happen because essentially your cloud is a bunch of servers in a data center somewhere, and it's subject to human error, and none of us is infallible. But I thought overall that they communicated well and did a good job to bring things back.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and I believe this the outage, it was a case of human error insofar as it was something to do with a certificate rollover that didn't go well. So it was more to do with someone not doing the job right rather than something intrinsically wrong with the system, which you could take as maybe a good or a bad thing. Maybe there should have been more steps in place to prevent it. At the end of the day, Azure AD is an enormously complex global infrastructure, and you could, I guess, we're all going to feel frustration whenever anything goes down. And it's certainly not good press insofar as you go on Twitter, you go on Facebook, and folk will say, oh, well, Teams is down, or SharePoint's down, or my email's down. Are those services really down? No, it's just the authentication into them, but that's not the user's perception. You know what I mean? And I think as things do get more centralized in the cloud, that's just going to have to be a challenge that not only Microsoft, but all the big cloud providers are going to have to face. It's that perception of, I'm so reliant on you, can I really trust you to have it available all the time that you say it's going to be available? Realistically, that's not going to happen.
Definitely, and you're exactly right. And it's not just Microsoft who've been susceptible to this. We've heard about Google and Amazon having these sort of things in not too recent, not too long ago times as well. So it's going to happen. It's part of life, and and it's going to lead to some interesting debate for sure. And companies, I think a lot of companies who are cloud averse, risk averse when it comes to cloud, will use it as an ammunition to justify their position and say, "Well, I told you so. We wouldn't have this if we kept it on premises." But there's lots of either or arguments about that, isn't there? And opinions, and that could run and run. But
yeah.
so what else have we got that's going on in the world of Microsoft 365 at the minute? I know you, Rue, thought that wanted to talk about some of the new exams that you've you noticed, and I think you've taken one of them as well already, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely. I booked all four, potentially, and biting off far more than I could ever chew, especially given that I just don't have the time to study for them. But so we've got these new SC coded exams, so they're all based around security and compliance, thus the SC codes. So they're currently going through the beta process. My understanding is that's just finished, so that'll be refined based on the feedback that folk who took the beta exams provide. That'll then get finalized and they'll be available in a, I guess, generally available format. So we've got SC200, which is Security Operations Analyst. That's focusing on the Defender stack, Microsoft 365 Defender, Azure Defender, and also Azure Sentinel. We have SC300, Identity and Access. It's an Azure AD exam, fundamentally. We've got SC400, which is Information Protection Administrator. I know that you're going to be very interested in that, talking about sensitivity labels, compliance, retention, archiving, all that good stuff. And then finally, I guess keeping consistent with the other families of exams, we've got the SC900, which is really a fundamentals exam. That would be, I guess, someone's entry into this whole journey of Microsoft 365 security and compliance. I guess just my own experience with those beta exams, they're quite tough. I've as someone who's been working with it day to day for quite a while now, I found the SE 900 exam reasonably straightforward. I would say the Information Protection Administrator, I went into that relatively confident, and I came out of it not so confident. So make sure when you're studying for that one, you go through the learning path and really focus on things such as, for me, especially my weak point was things such as retention and archiving and things like that. Love sensitivity labels, can sing the praises of that all day. Think of this more as there's going to be a lot more interested in the compliance side of security and compliance rather than security. But I mean, I guess I'm talking to the right guy here. As a distinguished author of, you have a Microsoft Teams certification book. I believe that's the MS 700. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep, that's right.
And then also your first book was on MS 500.
Correct, yeah, which is actually called Microsoft Security Administration, which I think that's mistitled because there's compliance in there as well. I think compliance is the forgotten child sometimes. It's not as well loved as security. I think security and compliance in general is come a long way in recent years. I think people are starting to take it seriously now. Certainly, in the company that you and I work for, we're seeing a lot more interest from customers in that journey with stepping up from E3 in Microsoft 365 to E5. We're not getting laughed out of the park now in those sort of discussions, but compliance is still lagging behind a little bit. So I'm really excited to take that exam when I get the chance to do it. I mean, I took a bunch of exams a couple of years ago. I had a busy year for exams in sort of 2019, and then last year I only did one, the Teams one. So I had a quiet year for exams. So I need to set aside some time to do some this year, and these new ones are definitely on my radar. I'll probably miss the stage that you've gone through of doing it in beta. I've never done a beta exam, and one of the things I think I would find frustrating about the betas is that you don't get your result immediately. You're still waiting to find out if you've passed or otherwise. But so I
That's
find
right.
that a
Yeah.
bit frustrating. But no, it's nice to see that Microsoft are listening to people in terms of certifications. I mean, one other thing that has recently happened is that to become recertified for exams that you've already passed, you don't have to do the whole exam again. There's a
Yes.
top up now that's coming, and my certs will be expiring in October this year, so I'll have to do little top ups for those to get recertified, which is nice. So I think they've really listened. I think they're doing great things. Big shout out to our good friend Chris Horde MVP, who lovely guy who sits on the Microsoft certification panel. So he's definitely got some good thoughts on that as well, and I think they're doing great things. But
Yeah.
awesome stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Anyhow, so I don't think there's anything more news-wise. We did debate mentioning some things about Ignite, but Ignite's just so long ago now
Ancient
in
history. Yep.
ancient history. So let's not do that. I'm sure next with each one of these that we do, there'll be relevant news from that week. So I guess it's time that we get into our first guest for this series, and who've we got lined up, Rue?
Oh yes,
Doesn't look.
yeah. No one better than Pete Rising himself. So, speaking about the format of the show, we'll cover briefly what's new, I guess, in our world, and then we'll focus on interviewing a guest in every show, hopefully. Certainly in this inaugural episode, I think you're the man for that job. You've got a great story to tell. So, without further ado, let's get going.
Amazing. Look forward to it.
So, I guess we'll start talking to you, Peter. Is you your son Oliver was just under 3 years old, I think, when he was first diagnosed with severe autism, uh, and that's a heavy thing to hear. I'm assuming for any parent. How did that official diagnosis affect how you care for Oliver? But then also, how did it affect your personal well-being? Um, and also, I'm thinking about Oliver's older brother, George, I think.
Mm. Oh, well, this is quite a long time ago now. It's coming up to almost 10 years. It was 1st of October 2012 when we got the official diagnosis for Oliver, and we were expecting it. We'd been working with pediatricians and various professionals for many, many months, knowing that there was something wasn't quite right with the way Oliver was developing, and we came into it really concerned about his lack of development with speech specifically. So we had an idea of what was coming, but it still doesn't prepare you for the enormity of what it is when it's in black and white. So that's a week that I'll never ever forget, because when we got the diagnosis, which we were expecting, it was the Monday, and there it was in black and white, and that's it. It's irrefutable. That's what you're dealing with, and you're immediately conscious of the fact, almost of the child that you've, in many ways, that you've lost, that you expected to have, but now that you don't, because they're going to have a very, very different life. And that sounds a bit crass, because I wouldn't change Oliver for the world. In the years that have followed, he's such a little bundle of joy. He has so many challenges, yes, but I wouldn't change the things that make him him. The only thing I would change is taking away some of his anxieties. But the reason that week was particularly grueling is because on the Monday of that week we got the diagnosis, and on the Friday of that week my mother, who had a very long-term illness with leukemia, passed away. So two life-changing events in a very, very short space of time, and that led into some major life changes for me in many ways, and that it led to a journey with mental health, which culminated a few months later when we moved house. But I guess we'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, it was a mad old time, And George at the time was, let me see, George would have been about 5 or 6 at the time when we got the diagnosis, and it didn't really affect him too much. We at that particular time we were still very, very capable of dividing our time between the two boys very, very well. It's actually harder now to do that than it was then, as Oliver's demands have increased and changed over the years, and George has naturally grown older, and he's 14 now and becoming a teenager. He wants less to do with us anyway, and the only time we really see him is when he wants food or money or, or something like that. So yeah, that was, yeah.
Right, yeah. And I guess it must have been heavy enough to find out officially that your son had autism, but when you couple that with, I'm sorry to hear about that passing, with the long-term leukemia, that must have been a hard time to get through. And obviously you worked at that time, I believe you were an IT manager, is that right?
I
How
was.
how do you go through something so significant in your personal life while at the same time working in a professional capacity, and how did it affect your work?
Well, it did. It affected my work greatly because at that time I worked as you say, as an IT manager on premises for a global manufacturing company, and they were a great company to work for. Really enjoyed my 6 years with them, but it did affect me in the sense that they were the sort of company who did put a lot of demand on you in many respects, and expected you to respond to things 24/7. So there was always that pressure there. But they were very, very good with me when it happened, as I think most companies would be, and gave me the time to deal with it and respond to it. But it was exceptionally difficult, because there was all sorts of arrangements that then needed to be made on that Friday when my mum passed away. Obviously, had to abandon everything and go to the hospital and see my mum one last time in intensive care, which is a very, very sobering experience. It's very, very, very odd indeed. I was prepared for what was going to happen. In some ways with my mum, I think I'd sensed it was coming. I mean, she'd been ill for about 10 years with it and coped with that illness very, very well. But in the last few months before her death, she was in and out of hospital, and I had a feeling, I think probably more than my dad and my brother. I think I sort of sensed it coming more than they did, perhaps, because I remember talking to my brother after we left the hospital on that evening and saying, just you do know to be prepared for what's coming, don't you? And he says, yeah, I think so. Um, but and then later on in the evening, we got the call that she had passed, and we had to go back. Um, so I had some time off work. I had a couple of weeks off work. We got things sorted. We had the funeral, and then whilst that's going on, we're starting to make arrangements for the things that we need to put in place for Oliver's life. We start thinking about the provisions that we need for him in terms of support, and we were encouraged to go for things that we're entitled to as the parents of a now officially disabled child. Things like disability living allowance and carers allowance for my wife Louise, who at that point in time had not really ruled out going back to doing a full-time job herself. But then after the diagnosis, that quickly went out the window. We made the decision that Louise would be a full-time mum and carer for Oliver, and we got that. But then in the coming months, we also made the decision to move house as well, which is not an easy thing to do at the best of times. I mean, you've been through it yourself recently, I know, so you'll
Yes.
appreciate that. It's it's a really hard and challenging thing to organize. And this was a few months later in early 2013, and we were a couple of days before the move. And this was a move really not to improve our size of house or upgrade or anything like that. It was to move a bit further down the road, about 45 minutes down the road from where we used to live in Durham, to Teesside, to be closer to my wife's parents, because they are a very, very strong sense of support for looking after Oliver. To this day, they're really the only two people who understand his needs and can look after him other than us. So this was about a week or a few days before the move. From recollection, I was sitting at work, and I had a little office in my job, actually, which I used to really love. It was I called it an office. It was more like a cupboard, but I was in there just working away one morning, and all of a sudden I felt really strange, very, very strange. I can't to this day describe what I was feeling like, but I didn't feel right, and I sort of stood up, and looking back at it, I thought, what's happening to me? Am I having a stroke or some sort of brain thing? I really didn't know, but I dashed out of the office, and a finance department was right outside, and they were a great bunch of people. I sort of got on really well with them, and they just looked at me in shock, and says, "Peter, well, you've gone white or grey or completely changed colour." And they took me to the walk-in centre that was nearby. We got one of the first aiders up and said, "Well, we better get you checked out." And I'm thinking there's something very, very seriously wrong with me. But when we get there and I get examined, the nurse who looked me over, and then the doctor, they came to the conclusion that I had in fact had my first panic attack, which and there began a whole new journey with mental health and anxiety, which I didn't see coming, but looking back now makes so much sense. But yeah, that's what culminated in, really, those few months led to a start of another journey with that.
Right. That's I mean, and you're very active in the tech community that Microsoft host. And a little while ago, you posted a guest blog on that forum, and you mentioned how you both had this panic attack, but then you also mentioned, kind of in reflection of your own childhood and your own psyche, that potentially Oliver's autism was an extreme example of maybe some anxieties and just feeling maybe a little bit different that you had growing up. When you went through that process of getting the therapy and after having the panic attack, how did that help you piece all this together, and how did it then help you move forward?
Yeah, it did. It made a huge difference. Sort of those two things came together in a sense, because Oliver's diagnosis explained a lot about my own childhood. Because growing up, I never really fit in. I was always a bit of a loner, a bit of an outsider. The other children at school, male or female, I didn't relate to them. They didn't seem to relate to me, other than to want to tease me for being a bit strange, which I took very personally, which just led them to see that they could get a reaction from me and do it more. So I had a hard time at school because of that. But yeah, then when I look back at those years, and then I see how Oliver is, and he's, as I've grown to know him, and as he's grown older with this, he is like me magnified. He's me times 1,000. Poor little fella, he has it much worse. So it did make sense. And when I started into therapy, there was two things that came out of that. There was coming to terms with the fact that what I was dealing with was what it was, because I didn't believe that I'd had a panic attack. It took me about 6 months or so to come to terms with that's what it was. And poor doctors and medical professionals, I basically went into a phase of challenging them to say it can't have been a panic attack. It must be something serious. So I had MRIs, I had all sorts of things, and they all came out fine. I was absolutely fine. So what it turns out that I had really was an extreme form of health anxiety. I think Men quite often get this, don't they? Anyway, I think men tend to, as a rule, not cope with being unwell as women do. My wife would certainly say so. And when we do get a little snuffle or something, we automatically think the worst. Whereas women tend to get on with it better, don't they? But that was one of the challenges, accepting that what I had was anxiety. So I'd had the counseling, which was really helpful to come to terms with accepting that. And then I started on medication, which is fluoxetine, better known in the States as Prozac. And I started on that in 2013, and I'm on that to this day. And it just helps me to control and regulate those symptoms. But no, looking back, what I went through as a child, it really resonated, started to make sense to me that, yeah, I'm obviously on this autism spectrum somewhere myself. I've never been diagnosed. I still haven't, but I'm firmly believe that I'm on there somewhere. And that mixed in with that anxiety that started and those panic attacks was quite an explosive combination. And the hardest thing to come to terms with, and I was thinking about this earlier today before we started recording this, is that since that first panic attack, I've never felt the same since then ever again as I did before then. It's like I changed. Something just flicked in me. And since that time, I've always had something in my head, like a feeling of spaced out or disconnected or dizziness or head pressure, or that's never went away since that first panic attack. Every single day there's something there, and I sometimes forget how I used to feel before, which is
Wow.
which is really weird when you think about it in those terms. So that day I completely changed as a person, and that was quite a realization when I remembered that, actually.
That's quite something, because I
Mm.
guess when people think about something such as a panic attack or
Mm.
anxiety, they think of, people seem to be very good at separating mind and body. And it
Mm.
sounds like what you're saying is there was almost a physical change that happened after that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the weird thing. That was what made me convinced that there was something wrong with me, but the mind is a really funny thing. I've learned a lot about this and read a lot of books about this and had a lot of counseling about this over the subsequent years. And the mind can convince the body that all sorts of weird stuff is happening to it. And there are various things that you can do to try and combat that. If you are what we call in this household a neurotypical person, which it's clear that I am not. And one of the things that Oliver has as part of his autism and his diagnosis, his learning difficulties and all that, he also has something called PDA, personal demand avoidance, where he doesn't like being told what to do.
Right.
And I've again, this resonated with me when I heard when we had professionals say, yeah, Oliver's definitely got this PDA. And well, yeah, I've got this too. I don't like being told what to do. I like to think that things are my idea. If somebody tells me what to do, I naturally rebel against it
Hmm.
and don't want to do it. Um, so that definitely made sense to me, that that was a thing without a doubt. And I'm now struggling to remember what your original question was. Actually, what was it again?
Me too. No, that's fine. And that's interesting. You mentioned that word there, neurotypical, I
Mm,
think you mentioned. So is that, does that refer to someone who maybe doesn't struggle with things, or certain elements of their psyche are just more, if you think of that bell curve of how people are in the
yeah.
wider society, is that people who are just kind of down the middle insofar as not extreme one way or the other?
I would say, yeah, maybe it's that, but maybe it's more just people who are not on the autism spectrum, somebody who has not got any symptoms or behavioral traits that would tie into that spectrum, that sort of diagnosis.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a phrase that I picked up from another autism parent very early on in this journey. Um, she referred to people who don't have autism or autism in their lives as the neurotypicals, which and I love that. I just thought, yeah, I'm nabbing that. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, I'll be nabbing it as well. Hopefully, I use it in the right context, but that's a great word. And I guess just thinking about this, I'm a I don't have kids at the minute, obviously, and I guess potentially like a lot of people who will be watching or listening to this show, is one of the things that me, like so many other people in the world, maybe especially since the pandemic lockdowns have started, is struggling with things like procrastination, where you're maybe working too much or you're maybe working too little, but you
Mm.
maybe don't feel like you're getting a lot done.
Mm.
Now, if you're in the scenario where you have two kids, you're locked in the house because of lockdown, one of those kids, you're going to have to take atypical care of, I guess, as a result of the autism diagnosis. And I'm just thinking, you're one of the most high output people that I know personally in my life. You've published, well, you've authored two books. One of them you were a co-author on. You still do all the Microsoft exams, and you're very active in things such as tech community and Twitter. How do you find or make the time? How do you prioritize your work? What's your general approach and philosophy?
I really don't know, is the honest answer. I do not know how I do it. And I don't have any sort of secret sauce or secret formula. It just sort of happens. I just sort of make it work. Each day I wake up and I don't really have a plan. That's the scary thing. I don't quite know how I do it all. And like the best of us in these modern times, I've got a fair bit of that old imposter syndrome that you
Mm,
talk to a number of people these days and they all feel the same, and it resonates so much with people when they say that. And I've had that all my life, all my career. I've thought, I'm not very good at this. I don't know why people should hire me or why they should like me, and I'm just coasting along. But I just seem to make it work, and it comes back to when I've been asked this in other interviews before that have been more career focused. It comes back to sort of late 2018, I think it was, when I started to do those Microsoft exams, because I'd never been academically minded. It's not something that I've ever enjoyed,
right.
school or exams. But I was encouraged to do Microsoft exams, and I thought, oh, I'll give it a go, but expected not to pass because I'd never really been able to pass exams. And then I passed that first one, and from there, it's like something inside me just clicked, and I got a drive and a focus and a passion to do things within that realm of interest that I never knew was there. And one thing led to another. Taking exams led to being approached to write the first book, which I immediately thought that when asked to do it, the imposter immediately crept in. No, I can't do that. But well,
Right.
suppose I could give it a go, and then boom, before you know it, you've got a book, and then it just spiraled from there. But I, I really can't answer the question. I don't have a plan. It just seems to work somehow, and there is no secret formula or secret sauce. I just seem to cram things in units of time.
Yeah. See, it's interesting when I ask that question, I can't help but wonder if a lot of people, and I include myself in this, we overthink things too much insofar as we have the rigid plan and we must stick to this plan in order to get X amount of output. You've mentioned this to me in the past and you kind of hinted at it there, is you're and shout me down if I'm mischaracterizing you here, but you have a tendency of just winging it, and that's how you'll get through things. Uh,
Mhm.
so I can't help but wondering if maybe people overthink things too much, and maybe we should stop thinking less and start doing more. That sounds a little bit hokey, but maybe that's all it takes.
No, you're absolutely right. I do say that. I've said that to you, I remember, and many of our other good friends and colleagues in the past, and it's so true. And it comes back to the old saying from Richard Branson, which I read many years ago, and I really really loved, and it said, if someone asks you if you can do something and you can't, but you want to have a go at it, well, just say yes and then learn how to do it. And
Mm,
that's the philosophy I've lived by. I've always been keen to just give things a go, and try and learn as I go. We learn by doing, and I find that to be so true. You do have to be careful not to take it too far, otherwise you can get into trouble. You don't want to blag your way through things because you'll get found out. So there's a fine balance to it, but so you have to use your judgment. But on the whole, I do wing things. The number of times I'll be on a community event, a talk or a customer call, and I'll get thrown into a situation that I'm not expecting, and I'm like, oh, I've got to react quickly, and I just find
mm.
myself going off on a tangent, and so it just seems to come to me, and I don't really quite know how, but I'm very glad that it does.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fair enough. And if you're doing things such as writing books, and I know that professionally you do consultancy, and you're helping folk out in general through the community, what is your approach to learning? You have two exam books out. What's, I guess, your advice for people who not necessarily want to learn just in order to pass an exam, but as a general approach, how should you go from being zero in something to being confident in it?
Mm. I think that's going to vary depending on the type of person that you are. I think we all learn in different ways. So best advice I can give anyone is to find what works for you. What
Mm.
worked for me was immersing myself in for the Microsoft exams that you and I do. I basically studied docs.com, which is Microsoft's uh,
Yes.
dictionary or whatever you want to call it, or well, their platform for all of their technologies. You really can learn pretty much anything within those docs. You have to work for it, you have to troll through it, and I tend to use that as my starting point. The learning paths for the exams there are very, very good, and you can go through those and some of the docs articles. In addition to that, I tend to look to supplement that with maybe some practice tests that you can get. You can get some very good practice tests, which you do have to pay for, but it's worth doing if you want to get yourself through it. I don't tend to. I think instructor-led learning for me is something that is becoming a bit more of a thing of the past. I think that
Mm.
it still happens. I know people still do it. For me, I don't think that works so much. I guess that maybe comes back to my PDA, my personal demand avoidance again, of being told what to do. I like learning on my own terms. I want to do this and I'm going to do it this way. And that seems to work for me. But everyone was going to have different ways of learning and assimilating that information.
Mm. And I guess you mentioned docs.microsoft.com, and in our world, that's a great resource. Do you find that you learn well kind of by setting aside the time and just reading, or are you a hands-on person? Do you have to go and lab it and learn it that way? How does it stay in your brain?
I'm a bit of a, no pun intended, but I'm a bit of a hybrid approach here in that I like to, I like to do what I can by doing it, by sort of labbing it out, but only to a point because I'm a cloud snob. If I do anything that needs a server, forget it. I don't want to know. I don't want to spend the time to spin up a server. A server's so last century to me. It's the past. So if I have to do anything servery, I'll just read about that and I'll wing it. There's the winging it again. But
Yeah.
so it's a bit of a mixture. I do tend to be able to store things fairly well by reading on the whole. So I'd say it's probably a mixture of about 70 to 30, where I do 70 sort of reading it and hoping it stays in, and 30 playing about with stuff that I can do in cloud and browsers.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're just you the uh the servers being a last century thing, that's a nice piece of controversy to sneak into this interview. Uh
Yeah.
what was it? I mean, you mentioned you were an IT manager, and then I know in our conversations in the past you mentioned that you didn't really have the fire under the proverbial backside that maybe got you up and being constantly engaged in IT as a hobby as much as a career.
Mm,
But then when you started working with Office 365 and doing those exams, that's when you start getting some personal momentum and some real passion, I guess, for lack of a better word. Uh,
yeah.
what what is it specifically about either
Mm.
365 or the cloud or that whole Microsoft stack that resonates you, that keeps you going?
Yeah, I think I've already partly answered this in a sense. I think it was a sense of after working for, I don't know, 20 odd years with server technologies, I was so sick and tired of servers,
Mm.
and the unpredictability of them, and the panic of staying after work and praying to the server gods that please reboot, please don't blue screen. That here was a technology I could really wrap my brain around. That, yeah, Microsoft are going to look after this for me. I'm not responsible for it, yet there's still a load of great stuff I can get my teeth into here and really enjoy. And I never felt that same. The server world just felt like stress. Whereas
Mm.
anything 365, it just immediately piqued my interest and felt this is cool. This is the way technology should be going. It's about time we were doing this. So that's why I think it resonated with me so much and piqued my interest. And there was a gap to be filled, because I don't know if this is harks back to my personality again and me being on the spectrum and such, but I've never really been somebody who's had a hobby. I've never had not a doing hobby, not a practical hobby. I like film and TV, but I've never been active or sports or creative or crafty or anything. So this is my first real hobby, this community stuff that I do now, and Office 365. It genuinely is what I love doing. It is my passion. So I think it basically stems from that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've certainly, in my own experience, there seems to be maybe, this is maybe simplifying, but there seems to maybe be two camps of quote unquote IT pro. There are ones who are very interested in the hardware and the tech and the
Mm,
buttons and the switches and all that kind of thing. And then there's potentially, and maybe you and I fall into this category, where we care more about the software and the output of that tech and
mm,
everything like that. There's certainly folk out there that, the whole, you will pull this switch from me from my cold dead hands, that kind of
mm.
approach. And I get the feeling that's not you. You're more interested in the software side of things rather than the hardware side of things. Is that fair to say?
It's definitely fair to say, and I think I like to think of myself as I do have to be careful not to offend my server and hardware friends here, and I do know many of them, but I tend to think of myself as a bit more progressive.
Oh,
So that's that's not gonna come across well, is it? But that's how I feel. I think technology needs to move forward, and I'm very impatient. I sometimes think technology is not advancing as quickly as I would like it to. I can see things that should be there. I'm not clever enough to invent them, but I'm
mm,
thinking, why has nobody done this yet? A bit like Steve Jobs, he was the ideas man, but he couldn't realize those. He needed a Steve Wozniak or a Johnny Ive to realize them, and I feel like a bit like that sometimes. I give you an example of that around our house. Well, Oliver has many devices. He's got lots of iPads and iPhones. He's got too many actually, but try and
mm.
prize them from his hands, and you'll be in trouble. And we have issues with charging them. He breaks charging wires because he bends them, and we go through so many charging wires. This company from Amazon, we order from them regularly. They must think, wow, these are our best customer, because we order them so frequently. And in my head, I think to myself, it's the year 2021. How come nobody has invented um, power over Wi-Fi yet? Like, why is that not a thing? Well, why can't somebody realize that? That would make life so much easier for me, because what people call wireless charging to me isn't wireless charging, because it's not got a wire, but you've got to put it on a pad,
Mm,
and you can't use it while it's on that. So what good is that? It's better to have a wire. So that's yeah, that's where my mindset is with that sort of thing.
yeah. I mean, I guess power over Wi-Fi, that's maybe a microwave. So maybe you could use it, but it might be a bit hot, I'm guessing. Uh, no,
True, true.
yeah,
Somebody's
yeah.
got to figure it out, though.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is the thing, and it's when we talk about servers and software and all that, and things not moving very fast, I get the feeling, I'm a Microsoft 365 guy more than an Azure guy. I realize there's crossover there, but
Mm,
certainly when we look at things such as Azure, we look at AWS rather, and the things that go on, not just that a system administrator can get, all the hundreds of services that these platforms now offer, but also what's going in the background that we don't see from the Microsoft
mm,
engineers. We talk about moving on from servers and hardware. The servers and hardware that they host, the level of complexity behind that nice simplified look that we get as users,
mm.
it's never been more complicated. And yet there are certain elements of it that to us as users are so much more simple. And I think it can be difficult to kind of appreciate that the complexity of the modern world is just
Mm.
mind-boggling. And I guess it's potentially the guys like you, through your books and through contributing to the community, you help kind of distill that so that folk can understand it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I like to think so. I like to try and make it as understandable well, as if I was reading it myself. I like things to be very, very simple and explainable and understandable. And a lot of reading material I find both online and books isn't always that way. It comes across a bit unintelligible and almost a bit snobbish sometimes.
Yeah.
So I like to try and make it accessible for everyone to be able to digest. So because I'm not the cleverest person in the world at all. I'm not a natural learner. I really have to work hard at learning and retaining knowledge. I found a way of doing it now that works for me, but it's not something that comes naturally. But you do see people who do have that. It's amazing people like that who have that ability, who are like sponges and they just remember facts and figures and statistics about things. And I struggle with that, and I think it comes down to what you're working with on a day-to-day basis. It'll be what you know the most, and if you haven't touched the technology for a while, you're not going to be able to respond quickly and answer questions about it. My books, for example, I was having a look through a couple of them the other day, and I can barely remember writing half of them.
Hmm.
And they've all got practice questions at the end of each chapters. Going through them sometimes, I get the answers wrong, and I wrote them. So it's what you're working predominantly with at that time. You get rusty on things. So, and yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And within Microsoft exam questions and things, there's always some controversy about how relevant are they to the real world, how complicated are they, and all that kind of thing. I guess when you're writing your books and you're thinking about putting together the content of that book and specifically the questions, how do you balance that fine line between, being conscious of non-disclosure agreements with exams and things like that, and how do you structure these questions so that the reader can get some insight as to what's going to come about, but not get in trouble with the guys at Microsoft?
Yeah, it is a bit of a fine balance. That's easier in the context of practice questions that I put at the end of each chapter, because at the end of each chapter, and this is yet another example of me winging it. I'll finish a chapter and it's, oh, right, questions. What I need 10 questions. What can they be? And I'm just thinking of them, plucking them out of the air, and they can be simple things like, which URL do you use to get to the Teams admin center? Is it this? Is it that? Or is it A, B, C, or D? So they're quite simple. But then what you have to do, that we have mock exam at the end of both of the books, and I've tried to make as realistic as possible in both cases to the real thing, and remembering what exams are like. Having done a fair few of them, you've got to have a couple of case studies in there, maybe, and some scenario-based questions. And you've got this company who have this, and that, and they want to get to here. And what do you do in this situation? What's the best approach? And click all answers that might apply. So it's you do have to be careful, and actually. What's really good about the publisher that I work with, they have very, very good, what's the word I'm looking for? Checks to make sure you're not plagiarism. They've got very good tools to search the content to make sure there's no plagiarism in there. And on the first book, inadvertently, I don't know if I'd recalled this as a question. I'd actually got a question in my book that was very, very similar to a real exam question. And the reason they were able to find this is that they trolled the internet, and I'm sure a lot of people will know this. You can find dodgy practice tests from out there if you want to. I am not encouraging that in any way, shape, or form, of course,
Yep.
but but they exist, and it matched one of those very, very closely. So I had to reword it and make it different enough so that it wasn't similar to that question. So it is hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to yourself personally taking the exams, online proctoring is a big thing now, especially given the shutdowns
Mm.
currently going on. Do you prefer the online experience, or are you an in-person kind of person?
I'm a bit of a contradiction in terms here to what I would normally say to this sort of thing, because I don't like leaving my house these days. I love being at home. And when the pandemic's over, I don't really want to go back out into the world, if I'm honest. But when it comes to exams, I've done one proctored and I hated it. So I would choose every single time to go to a test center. It feels like everything is out of my control there, which I like in that particular. I don't have to worry about the machine not working. You know, if there's a technical problem with the computer in the test center, it's not my problem to solve. Whereas if my internet breaks during the proctoring experience, then that is my problem, and then I've potentially just automatically failed. So I worry about things like that, and worry about getting disturbed by family in the house, for example, because if somebody walks in, and then that's an automatic fail potentially as well. So I don't like that pressure. I'd much rather do it in a test center.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it's all about managing your stress, because if you're stressed during an exam, that's not going to help anyone. And I guess just
Exactly.
a general question on that then, how do you, as you're going through your professional career, how do you cope with something like stress? You mentioned you kind of had therapy and potential problems with anxiety and panic attacks. How do you mediate that? How do you balance between taking on good and rewarding amounts of work with not getting overwhelmed with it?
It's knowing your triggers, I think, is the key to it. Knowing how you're feeling at any particular time, because it can vary. You can be more anxious and stressed depending on your life circumstances and your work circumstances on any given week. So I try and be very, very mindful of knowing my triggers. I've got a lot better at managing it over the years. I mean, since I had my first panic attack in 2013, I've had what I would describe as really bad panic attacks, debilitating ones, which meant I couldn't function for a number of hours and needed to go and have a little lie down. I can count those on one hand. I've maybe had 4 or 5 of those in total. I had one not too long ago, actually, just before Christmas, and this happened whilst driving, which was scary as
Wow.
as heck, as you can imagine. I was driving Louise and Oliver around to my in-laws for Oliver to go and visit there, because he goes around there quite regularly to give us a bit of respite, and I just got that sort of spaced out, dizzy feeling, which manifests itself in my health anxiety brain sort of immediately kicks in, and despite years later being educated that this is an anxiety attack, oh my god, there's something wrong with me, and you think of all the consequences that are going to happen, but they are rare, quite thankfully. On the whole, they're just little wobbles that happen in the course of pretty much every day, and it's just recognizing and trying to and I'm better at this sometimes than others, trying to eat well, trying to exercise. I'm trying to get a bit more into that at the minute, and drinking more water and less coffee, and I don't drink alcohol. I used to drink alcohol too much, probably, and I cut that out a couple of years ago, and that's been a big benefit. That's another aspect of my personality, actually, which I think ties into this whole spectrum journey, is that I'm a very, very black and white person. I'm an either or person, in that I'll either go completely this way or completely that way. There's no moderation. There's no middle. If I give up, I can't just have a few drinks. I've got to have a lot of drinks, or no drinks whatsoever. The same with with food. I mean, I'm a real sweet tooth as well. I'm a proper chocolate addict. And if I have a big bar, I could just sit and just gorge on chocolate. And it's not good. But at the moment, I'm completely off it. There's no middle ground. But it's trying to recognize your triggers, and putting strategies in place to cope with them. And talking about it. Talking helps so much. Talking to your nearest and dearest, talking to Louise, just makes you feel better, and getting it out there, and just trying to have as healthy a mindset about it as you possibly can. Some things you can't control, but you can just react as best you can to them.
Yeah, talking's an interesting one. You mentioned earlier how sometimes maybe men in particular might uh, approach health in a negative way, might keep things to themselves too much. But talking is a strange one. It's kind of like one of these things, at least in my experience. It's maybe a little bit like exercise, and I don't want to say it's a miracle cure, but the benefits you can get from just doing something as simple as talking something through, it can really help. it can stop something from really ballooning inside your mind into being something you can start controlling.
Oh, it certainly can. Yeah, I found therapy and talking and counseling very, very beneficial to certain. I mean, there are different kinds of therapy, and I've
Yes.
just remembered the question that I was wanting to answer before, and it relates to there's a form of therapy, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and that doesn't work for me personally because that's
Okay.
a form of being told what to do. And interesting, I just found out about this earlier last week when we had one of Oliver's health professionals come around and say exactly that. CBT doesn't work for everyone. It doesn't work for people who have PDA, personal demand avoidance, because they don't like being told what to do. And that made so much sense to me because I had CBT in the early days and it's just a waste of time. This is not working for me.
Hmm.
But different sorts of therapy, just sitting and talking things out with a therapist and almost answering your own questions, because therapists are very clever in that
Yes.
situation. They put you very at ease, and you'll walk into the room and they'll where do you want to sit, and they'll get so much out of little things like that, where you've just which chair you've chosen. They're super clever and switched on about everything, body language and all that, and half of it is them just listening to you. That's the magic of
Mm.
therapy. They'll just give you little nudges, which, and you've arrived at the decision, not them. They've not told you what to do, but it's so effective. It works so well for me anyway. But again, it comes back to the type of person you are. What works for one person won't work for another, and CBT might be exactly what you need. If you're watching this, it might be perfect for you, and other sorts of therapy maybe not so much. Medication may work for some people and not for others, and there are different sorts of medication as well. I mean, it took me a while to settle onto fluoxetine. I tried another one before that which didn't agree with me at all. It made me worse. um, but but that particular medication I know works wonders for other people. So it's all about um, chemical compatibility and all that sort of stuff. So you've really that's my secret sauce to life, I guess, if you like, is you've got to find what works for you because we're all different.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And the thing is as well, you won't find it necessarily immediately, and that can be a long process, I guess, as
Mhm.
as you mentioned earlier. Uh,
Yeah.
if I'll wrap up this conversation because I'm conscious of your time and I don't want to keep you too long. However, we spoke about earlier how maybe I don't want to reveal your age to the good audience here, but you mentioned how you were an IT manager, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you've kind of used like terms like just wandering along and getting on with things to me.
Mm.
So I guess although it might take a long time for you to find your passion in life and how things you are going to have to mediate your own life, uh, I guess how do you recommend people maybe, I don't want to say accelerate that process, but if there is
Hmm.
someone in a position such as yourself where they're maybe sitting there, they're maybe feeling like they're plateauing in their current IT position, how should they maybe look and move things into the next gear?
Mm. I would say that, and first of all, I'm not precious about age at all. I'm going to be 49 this year, which is I can't quite believe, but I don't mind anyone knowing how old I am. But I would say that for me personally, I can only speak from personal experience again, though, is not to try and force it. I think just let these things happen when they're meant to happen. I think if you try and do something at different times of your life, you'll see different results. And if you put that pressure on yourself, I never put pressure on myself to do this. All the stars just seem to align for me, and hopefully the same will happen for anyone listening to this who's thinking in those terms. Yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't apply yourself. If you feel the time has come and the time is right to do something, just go for it. Just try it, see where you get to. You might find it's not quite for you. If not, then try something else. But one of my sayings, I've got a lot of sayings and my wife hates them all. She says I overuse many sayings, but one of them is don't rule anything in or out. Really don't try things, and if that doesn't work, try a different thing, and you'll strike the right balance in time. I tend to find human beings are very determined and resilient characters, and just have a bit of faith that you will find your path and you'll find your place. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. I mean, I describe myself as a late bloomer. The last couple of years, my career and journey has only really taken off to a level that I never imagined it would. I thought I would always just course through the rest of my career and towards retirement, whenever that may be. But it's just reached a level of very fortunate success, which I'm very grateful for, and just can't believe it's happened. But that I never imagined I'd reach. But yeah, just go for it. Don't be afraid to try things. Don't be afraid to fail is the most important thing. I mean, one thing that could have easily put me off after that first exam that I did is that the next one I did, I actually failed. And I thought, oh, that's a bit of a setback, but let's try not to let it, get things off the rails. Let's just regroup, swat up, take the exam again. And I did, and I passed it on the second attempt. And touch wood, cross fingers, I've never failed another one since. I've taken sort of 8 straight exams since then and got through every one. Every time I do one, I think I'm going to fail it. I never think I'm going to pass. But all you can do is try your best, and if it doesn't work out, don't beat yourself up. Just dust yourself off, give it another go. That's what's working for me at the minute. It might not always work. I might just be going through a phase of just extreme good luck. Long may it continue, but who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's good advice to part on then, is don't be afraid of failure. You'd be hard pushed to find many folk who were successful in life that didn't have quite a few failures under their belt too. So I think that's a good point to wrap this up. And thank you for your time.
Oh, definitely. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. It's been cracking talking to you, as always.
Great, good stuff. So I guess we'll wrap up this inaugural episode of Cloud Conversations with Rue and Pete. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you all. See you next time.